Hey everyone, David here. I normally do not make React videos, but I had to make one in response to this first round article on Airtable's path to product market fit. This isn't a criticism of Airtable or even First Round. I'm a huge fan of both of them, but there was a part of this article that really struck a nerve with me. And it was this really specific line right here about don't follow the fad. You know, at the time they were trying to find fit, right? Lean Startup was making the rounds in 4 Steps to Epiphany and this idea of a lean, development model. And they decided that that was not an approach they wanted to go with. And I was really kind of puzzled by that. And then I saw how they put it into words. And they said, it's basically where you put out a super rough prototype to get to know the customer and quickly pivot. Now, this is inherently one of the challenges with build, measure, learn loop in the sense of people start with a build. And it doesn't even matter how much we explain start with learn to an extent. Even Eric Ries explained it that way, and I think it was largely ignored, and he created the build, measure, learn loop. So I vaguely remember, and I found it, there was an Inc.com magazine article way back before Lean Startup became popular, and it was about Eric being interviewed about how to create it. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom of this article, he talks specifically about the build, measure, learn loop, and he's like, "Hey, I named this loop build, measure, learn, but the planning really works in the reverse order." Okay, we need to figure out what we need to learn, and then figure out what we need to measure to get that knowledge, and then figure out what product we need to build to run that experiment to get that measurement. And it may not even be a product to build, right? It may be just an activity you need to perform, an experiment you need to run to generate the evidence you need to learn. And yet it's completely ignored. One of the most famous articles I've written anyway, that was quoted in books by Eric and other people. One of the things I tried to capture with the struggle around this was, I feel as if one of the hardest things to convey is to people who spent their lives building to build and not building to learn, right? So we're incentivized to build, to produce something, and that's visible, right? And it's really hard to measure learning. It's really hard to measure or incentivize for outcomes versus outputs. And so I just wanted to sketch this out one more time for you all. So here we have the build, measure, learn loop. And typically how this works is if you think of, oh, I start with build, then it's going to be, okay, what do I need to measure, right? Based on how instrument analytics and everything for what I'm building, and then learn from that, right? And then try to go through that cycle again. And it's inherently a challenge because when we start with build, prioritizing analytics, prioritizing what we measure, it's really difficult to do. Sometimes you don't have the skill set. Sometimes you just don't feel like you have the time. And then you quite never get to the learn part. And so you have to be really careful because what will happen is, you just end up building more after you build the first time. And then instead of learning, it's like, well, there's more stuff to build, right? And so before you know it, you just end up in this kind of build loop that, there's no really validated learning occurring because you're just building and iterating. And if people don't use it, which is one of the challenges of going out really quickly in low code, no code solutions right now, is that you don't know why they're not using it. And then you try to add more stuff in hopes they use it. And it may just be that you didn't really understand the value proposition, or it was poorly worded, or you didn't have a jobs pain or gain to really connect to. And so instead, what I'm always preaching to people, if you look back at any of my videos in the past, is what do you need to learn? Start here. What do you need to learn? And then what do you need to measure to learn that? It's probably a mix of qualitative and quantitative things that you need to measure to learn. And then what do we need to build to measure to learn that? And I use the term build loosely because it may not be building anything. It's just maybe running, different experiments to learn what you need to learn to generate this evidence, and then synthesize that and then go back into this loop. And so when I look at the order here, it's very much like start here, right? With learn, figure out what you need to measure, figure out what you need to build. Maybe that's just running an experiment, right? And then going through this loop is going to be much more fruitful of an exercise than just starting with build. And I think this really struck a nerve with me because this has been something I've been preaching over the years, and still yet in 2022, I see people describing it in a way where it's just build, measure, learn. So you go build, and then you try to measure what people want, and then you learn, and it just doesn't work that way. So I'm curious what your thoughts are. If you have challenges framing it this way, how you break through to people to understand, starting with learn is the key in this cycle. Let me know in the comments below. Thanks.